the radar like they'd like. Not able to gaslight people into not believing what they're seeing. President Trump mentioned critical race theory in the schools at his rally in Wellington, Ohio, Saturday night, and it got a resounding boo, which was good, not just because it was the right answer, but because it was recognized throughout that crowd. We've talked about and provided many instances of all of the manifestations of neo-Marxism in our culture at present. And, of course, against the backdrop of the Olympics, that certainly would include gender identity. Quentin Tarantino gave an interesting interview over the weekend, the great director, Bill Maher's program, in which, among other things, in addition to discussing whether or not he's only going to, or should really, only direct one more film, which is what he said, he had this to say about this moment in America.
But there has become a thing that's gone on, it seems like in this, especially this last year, where, what's the word I'm looking at? Ideology is more important than art.
Way more, certainly to the awards.
Yeah. And it's just, it's like, ideology trumps art. Ideology trumps individual effort. Ideology trumps good. Ideology trumps entertaining.
There's two kinds of movies, virtue signalers and superhero movies.
Yeah.
So ideology, forget what Bill Maher said. Ideology trumps art. It trumps individual effort. It trumps excellence. It trumps biology. To wit, New Zealand weightlifter Laurel Hubbard at the Olympics. And I'll turn it over to our correspondent at large, J.P. Sears, for some comment on that.
After somehow dominating competitions recently, New Zealand weightlifter Laurel Hubbard is making very non-binary waves. As the Olympic Committee announced, Laurel will be allowed to compete in women's weightlifting at the Olympics. And for some reason, some people who aren't indoctrinated into Marxism enough to disown objective truth think women's sports should be reserved for biological women only. That smells uninclusive to me. This just in! If you think women's sports should only be for biological women, then you're transphobic. So shut up! End of discussion, forever. Most hysterical one wins. These people are likely the same ones that buy into the baseless conspiracy theories that humans have an immune system and that hormones make a difference in the body. When Laurel Hubbard was a man, the man that she was competing in weightlifting and impressively set a New Zealand junior national record in 1998 in the men's category. And this makes Laurel a perfect candidate for women's weightlifting because she's starting on a very level playing field with the other women. How level? Well, Laurel is 43 years old and she transitioned from biological male to non-biological female at 35 years old. So Laurel lived with a male's testosterone level for 35 years, while all other female competitors at the Tokyo Olympics will have lived with a male's testosterone level for exactly 0 years. Maybe worth noting, testosterone is the primary hormone responsible for strength, muscle growth, and bone density. Allegedly, all helpful things for weightlifting. What's the difference between men's and women's testosterone levels? Well, from an identity politics perspective, no difference. From a scientific perspective, based in reality, a big difference.
For a more reality-based discussion on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Congresswoman Mary Miller. She's representative from Illinois' 15th, which is Southern Illinois, serves on the House Committee on Ag and the House Committee on Education and Labor. Representative Miller, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So you have taken up this issue of this ideology trumping biological science, trumping objective reality as part of your work in Congress. Explain what you're doing to try to advance the flag for reality.
Yes. Well, first of all, I want to tell the listeners that the Democrat Party has been taken over by leftist revolutionaries. And they do have plans to transform our country and our way of life. It is not a small possibility. It's a significant threat. And they're changing our culture by coercion and force. So recently, President Biden's education secretary, Cardona, put out under his leadership a resource. It was distributed to all public schools. It's a public document, and it's on his website. And it's called Confronting Anti-LGBTQI plus Harassment in Schools. And one of the examples he uses, or that they put on this paper of harassment, is a teacher telling students that two genders. So in the hearing last week, I asked him how many genders there are. And of course, he quickly deflected because he didn't want to answer it. And so I re-questioned him, and he answered, "I won't be asking your question." So, I'm just so concerned about the increase of radical gender ideology in our schools. I mean, our girls should feel safe in their private spaces, the bathrooms and the locker rooms. And I reminded him that he's on the wrong side of the issue. Americans do not want this in their schools. And this is going to be the end of girls' athletics, which is one reason that I proposed the Safety and Opportunity for Girls Act. And it's very common sense. It states that when sex is referred to in Title IX, it means biological and genetic. So, all the rest of us agree that there's two sexes. And I did ask him what they're going to do about teaching biology in school also. That's another question I had. And another question I had for him was, what are they going to do if a student complains that she doesn't feel comfortable in a locker room with a male or a boy? I mean, is she going to be accused of harassment also? I mean, this is just going to create absolute chaos and put, our teachers and students in a really precarious position on this issue.
Well, Mary, did Education Secretary Cardona answer that question? Because it seems like if you identify with what you're born with, you have no rights. So they're discriminating against us.
Exactly. That's what I said, because their thing is we need to protect people, which I have nothing, and I'm sure our listeners too, have nothing but sympathy for those that are struggling with gender confusion. But instead of offering the kids help, this department is planning to punish schools and teachers, and I'm guessing students that complain, anybody that is going to attempt to protect girls' privacy or support female sports. The majority of Americans disagree with this department's position.
Mm-hmm. And your husband, Chris, is a state rep, and he fought that fight at the state level, and in the decided supermajority. That didn't go very well. But this is the same thing that's happening at the federal level is happening at the state level in Illinois through the REACH Act and this quote unquote comprehensive sex ed, which is really the sexualization and politicization of sex and gender starting in kindergarten.
Well, and I'm a mom and a teacher, and I can tell you there's not enough time in the day to get to all the core subject material that you want to do. And that's the other problem with this, is by bringing in all these weird subjects, they're taking time away from the core subject matter. And I don't know how we could do this, but I think if they want to put these fringe educational experiences into the public school, I think instead of having parents opt their children out of them, I think parents should have to opt their children into them, because by giving them the opt-out option, parents are always the last to know about what's going on. And this way, parents would have to know and say, yes, I want my kids to learn how to be a pervert and have bizarre sex when they're in first grade. But this is crazy. I mean, our children are the greatest resource of our nation, and regular people like you and I, we're the ground troops. We need to show up at school boards, run for school board, find out what the curriculums are, and just show up at school and take your kids out of those classes.
Yeah, well, collectively, Illinois parents have failed miserably when it comes to protecting our kids. I mean, look at how we let the government roll all over us for these COVID, draconian lockdowns, and nobody fought back. Just a handful of parents fought back. So how are we going to motivate other parents to get involved in this?
Well, I think people need to show up at the schools and demand from the superintendent and the school boards, what are you teaching? Now, I've talked to multiple teachers, regional superintendent of schools, and superintendents that are planning not to follow these directives. So it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen to these courageous leaders that are going to stand up. But I tell people, if you aren't willing to suffer now, I guarantee the suffering will be greater later, because these people are radical revolutionaries and they're going after our children.
At the federal level, then, Cardona, Education Secretary, and the Democrat Socialists, they intend to tie federal funding to the adoption of these standards you were describing, I presume?
I'm sure that they will. And they want to make examples out of people. And I think people have to be ready for that to happen. I don't know if it's going to be me or you or whoever, but they're going to go after us. I mean, that's why they're working in the military. They're militarizing the police. That's their goal. I keep telling my children and other people, these people aren't anti-police. They're anti-local police. And I mean, they're trying to move their ideology forward on every front, but a couple things are in their way, thankfully. And there are great patriots out here, which, people should be encouraged about that. And the freshman class is a fantastic group that is, hit the ground running and want to fight for our constitutional rights. The other thing that stands in their way is the Constitution. And the third amazing thing is the American people. The majority of American people believe that they've gone too far with everything. I mean, they're creating all these crises in our country. These are man-made crises. We've got them on every front: economic, border crises, energy crises. I think we've seen nothing yet in light of our, energy costs going up. We're creating security crises by negotiating with terrorists, crises in the school, crises with the police.
Just a quick political question. You brought up the freshman class, of which you're a member. Any insights on what the congressional map is going to look like in Illinois and who's going to be left without a chair?
No, but I do believe that the Democrats don't care if they do end up in court over the maps, if they can get what they want in the next election, and they want to eliminate one or more seats. So, I think that they'll get the crayon out like a kindergartner and gerrymander these maps.
Oh, yes, for sure. We know that.
And Pritzker promised he wouldn't do that.
Representative Mary Miller, Illinois' 15th, Southern Illinois House Committee on Ag and House Committee on Education and Labor. Representative Miller, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Procrastinators, this commercial is for you. And don't worry, it will air tomorrow as well in case that's better for you. We all procrastinate at some things, right? For me, it's letting my crazy grass grow. But when it comes to procrastinating, there's always a light bulb